Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cat A webinars, and Happy New Year. Excited to have you guys. First one of the new year. So I'm going to be your host. I'm Ashley, and I'm just going to be in the background helping with, polls and tools and such. And we have some great speakers, Hazem and Vasavi, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hazem, and I'm from the PowerCat team of the Copilot Advisory and Acceleration team. And I just want to say Happy New Year for everyone. I know that's debatable whether to stop saying Happy New Year after the 5th or 10th, but given that this is the first webinar for this year, I'll just say Happy New Year for everyone. Vasavi.
Thank you, Hazem, and thank you, Ashley. Hi, everyone. I'm Vasavi Bavariseti. I'm also on the CAT team. We had different names in the past, but now we are the Copilot Acceleration or Advisory team. I'm glad to be back here. Happy New Year, everyone, once again. And we are super glad to be the first speakers of the AI webinars for the new year 2026. Over to you, Ashley.
Welcome to a practical framework to turn use cases into powerful agents. And I will hand it over to our speakers.
Thanks, Vasavi. So I'll probably start with the kind of high-level overview for those who are not necessarily familiar with the different set of offering when we talk about like agents and Copilot. But when it comes to using and building agents, there are like plenty of powerful options offered by Microsoft today, ranging from Copilot Chat. And for those of you who are not necessarily familiar with Copilot Chat, it's just the equivalent of ChatGPT, and it's mainly used for personal productivity. I personally used it a couple of times today, and yesterday I was trying to look for like certain links and dig into emails. You just type in a question. The biggest advantage is that it's connected already and grounded into your enterprise data, so it goes back, provide you answers that are relevant based on that. Going to M365 Copilot, again, you can just like throw a prompt today, and going all the way to Microsoft Foundry, where it's more catered around like professional developers building custom models. If you have your own data that you would like to kind of customize and build models on top of. But of course, all of that is great, but we also know that it can be a little bit overwhelming. And I'll just drop a link for one of the tools that we put together. Ideally give you a more structured approach in terms of like figuring out how you can or like evaluate and assess which type of Copilot, which tool should you be using. And this is different from what we're presenting today, but also it's going to be a useful tool for everyone. There is also some ongoing work around like updating these tools, but you can think of it like a decision matrix that you can leverage to figure out, should I just start with Copilot Chat? Should I be looking into custom agents in Copilot Studio? So please have a look when you have a chance, and you'll find definitely this useful. So in today's session, we won't be diving specifically into the nitty-gritty details of the architecture and design of Copilot. Given that this is at the beginning of the year, we'll just like have kind of more high-level yet important, critical topic that we're going to be covering, but it's not about like individual features inside Copilot Studio. Instead, we're going to be focusing more on terms of like more practical strategic approaches and frameworks to building agents. You have an idea, you have a problem, you have a pain point, and you think that there is a solution that you can actually implement and take it through by building an agent. Like, how do you do this transition? So going back into our initial question around like, I just probably jumped straight into building and opening Copilot, which is, there is a kind of right or wrong way. Your industry can potentially dictate like certain requirements. If you into a highly regulated environment or industry, you might need to document things first anyhow. You might do it later. You might just like jump into an MVP right away. But the question is like, okay, what's really the quick balanced approach for that? So again, like building blocks when it comes to Copilot, you're probably already familiar with like things that along the lines of like knowledge, tools, and the different foundation models that we keep adding into that kind of library of models. We started with the OpenAI models with different versions. Now we have introduced anthropic models, so that give you the power and the flexibility to even tailor and customize that a little bit further. But just to zoom in into kind of the three three major building blocks, because we're going to be referring to them later on, and there is typically some confusion around that. We just going to be highlighting a few kind of major differences between topics, tools, and knowledge. But before even getting there, I think one of the very important building blocks when it comes to Copilot agents is the orchestrator. And you can think of the orchestrator as the brain that is always working behind the scenes. And it's trying to just like constantly analyzing and trying to come up with dynamic plan to achieve the intended goal of an agent. So your end user types in a question or like a query, and then it tries to figure out like, okay, what's the intent behind that question, and which tools should I be using? What are the different available knowledge sources? If it's already grounded to certain knowledge sources, how can it extract that? If it's going to be leveraging a tool, what are the associated inputs that I need to collect first in order to be able to efficiently run that tool? And then start coming up with a question or like few questions. Or if you have a more deterministic flow, then and it's mapped to a topic. So practically, it just the key differences between topics, tools, and knowledge. Topics is, you can think of it like more guided conversation, more deterministic flow. And then think of the example of like someone is going to be actually dealing with an agent that is capable of retrieving or creating new tickets. Then if you have a topic that is going to be collecting a certain set of information about, let's say, what's the priority of the issue that you're trying to file, what's your main concern, can you provide me more information, and so on. So this is mainly meant to be a tool, again, if you have a kind of more control, granular control over a deterministic flow inside your agent. Whereas tools, you can think of them of more often being used for transactional commitment or action. Think again of the different connectors that you can use today. So let's say that you collected this information. Now you want to commit or create a ticket in service now. Or let's say that you collected this information and you have a third-party system or a system of record where you want to actually send a notification email and commit that as a record and do other actions. So the agent and the orchestrator can have a set of tools to leverage all of that in order to execute a certain or specific action. And then last but not least, the knowledge. I think potentially everyone is familiar now with like grounding, like ingesting specific knowledge to narrow down the information or set of information that your agent is capable of leveraging, and then able to generate a proper answer based on that information. So again, think of it like different scenarios, and Vasavi later on are going to be showing us like a few specific examples that reflect on each of those topics. But mainly think about like, again, you just have all of the information about the different tickets stored somewhere, or let's say all of the information about your HR policies stored in certain documents inside SharePoint or in any other data records. You can ground your agent into that. So forgot to take control, and let me do that right now, Zavi. Yeah, I don't know, the slides are not, they don't want to actually change. So perfect, thank you. Good. So I think, again, going back into the scenario of like, okay, great, I have an idea. Where should I start? And this is the kind of most common question. I was like, I want to build a solution to define pain point. Where should I start? But going back to, is this really the right question that you should be asking? Or is there even a more kind of meaningful question? I'll give you back control, Vasavi, to just like let you probably go through the slides. So if you can go to the next slide. So the question that is, I think, more important and critical when it comes to building your agent is really, what outcome are you trying to achieve? Because the answer to that question will definitely determine many of the design decisions, things that you are going to be leveraging, whether those are going to be like tools or knowledge, as we pointed out, or multiple other impactful aspects of your agent. So definitely this question, or the answer to that question, is around like what outcomes are you trying to achieve, should bring clarity and point you straight to kind of the right path around building your agent. Next slide. So going back, we're like, okay, let's start building. What are the options that I have to actually help me to accelerate and leverage that? So when you go into Copilot Studio today, there are like a couple of options that you can leverage in order to kind of jumpstart your building process. And in my experience, like a couple of those options are typically overlooked. Option number one, starting with a template. We are continuously investing in building more and more templates. So I'm not even sure if this screenshot is a reflection of all the templates, but this is definitely a good starting point for many of the agent building projects, where you can look back into a template and see if there is actually any similarity or matches between your own scenario, because that is potentially going to help you to just like at least in some cases take you kind of halfway up the ladder between what your agent or what type of agents you're trying to build and what the template can you provide you. So it's always highly recommended to just like take a look at the template, see if there is any similarity, see if there is actually any kind of, even not necessarily from a use case perspective, maybe from a design and architecture, by just looking into a template, starting with a template, that can help you to just give you some ideas and thoughts around either design approaches, patterns, or if you're lucky enough in a case it actually might even match your scenario and you can go there and edit that template. The second one is mainly using natural language to build your Copilot. Same story. If you're in doubt or you would like to, let's say, get inspired by certain designs or certain aspects, you should definitely consider just like starting there. It will definitely start assembling the agent. Let's say very basic, if not necessarily advanced, design and architecture of your agent. So it's definitely a fantastic way to begin there. And also, in some cases, it actually, for highly advanced scenarios, it can give you some ideas and then you can go from there and refine it. So those are kind of the two entry points when it comes to building your agent. Next slide. But now going back into I think what the survey that or poll that we have done reflected is like, I'm one of those kind of eager builders, like most of you and us, probably just like, okay, I would like to go into Copilot Studio, build, jump there and start doing that. But we know for a fact that it's also essential for many complex production quality agents that you first need to address the business needs. And as I mentioned, because those will eventually drive many of the design decisions that you will have to make later on. And we know for a fact that in traditional software development, they just like follow the more structured approach. So in the old days, it's just like you start with requirement documents, you move into design documents, and then you go and iterate through those documents, and you have potentially even more phases, depending again on your industry, your business requirement. If you're working in banking, you might have more. If you're working in insurance or healthcare, it highly depends. But then at the other end of the spectrum, or you have the kind of agile methodology where people were encouraged more around like, hey, let's figure out a more iterative, streamlined approach that is focusing more on like the essentials. And some of you might be familiar with like there used to be a terminology in Agile called gold-plated documents versus silver-plated. Gold-plated meant like, hey, those are the minimal. You need to have those irrespective. Silver is like, okay, those are kind of optional. You can later on think about them. But that ideally meant to be just providing you with the flexibility. But the challenge that we see with agents, especially that you're trying to iterate, prototype, and we know for a fact that no matter what, once you start your initial iteration, and in some cases even based on our experience, once you go into production deployment, you will always find out more input. You'll have to go back, refine, and iterate. So how do you identify that kind of balanced starting point to enable kind of effective planning, yet without excessive documentation, but also you don't want to just like jump straight. And this is where we think the framework that we're presenting today provides that value. So this is what we call the Copilot Studio Canvas, and it's mainly a visual one page. Don't look at this scale. Ideally think about like printing this as a kind of whiteboard scale, where it's a tool to help you map out and analyze how you build your custom agent using 9 key building blocks. And they are intentionally aligned and reflective of how that is implemented inside Copilot Studio. And it's mainly meant to be kind of offering clarity and alignment and also speed by simplifying kind of just the overall agent planning with the rest of your team and stakeholders. So think about, again, you just have an idea or a use case or a pinpoint. You start with use case description, ideally using something like jobs to be done. So let's say that I have a problem trying to optimize and solve for an HR use case. And again, Vasavi is going to be walking us through a couple of practical examples of how to start with a pinpoint or use case and then transition into that. But let's say you just like outline that, hey, I am as an employee in company X, I'm trying to actually achieve the following, or I'm trying to do the following. And then you just like provide that description. And then you start moving on into the different building blocks. I won't be necessarily covering all of them, but it's meant to just be used again as a tool to collaborate and reflect and brainstorm. So again, think about like bringing in your team into a room. You just have an idea. You start mapping out those into the canvas and outline everything that you can think of across the different stakeholders. So if you have people from finance or people from HR, you ask them about like, okay, where are we planning, or what are the different channels that we would like to build this agent? Oh, this is actually going to be an internal agent. It's going to be available for employees. So it makes sense to actually put it in M365. Okay, let's actually outline this. It's like, oh, but you know what? We would like to actually even allow employees to go and send SMS messages and get responses back. Okay, now we have to actually consider another channel for that. If we're talking about like an autonomous agent, it's like, okay, is this not conversational? What are we talking about? So it's meant to be like reflection of those different. I think we need to probably mute folks, but yeah. So again, triggers, it depends on the type of the agent, and so on for every other block. If you have your team in one room, start with that simple process. It will help you to map out and figure out either the missing different pieces or some of the potential blockers, or even identify additional stakeholders that you think that you need to bring into the room to answer some of the questions or missing pieces. So again, let's say that now you're thinking that we need to access a specific tool, a third party, let's say Salesforce. You might start thinking about like, okay, is this actually hosted in cloud, on-prem? If it's on-prem, do we need access to that? What does that mean from permission perspective? Oh, we don't have actually anyone from the security team or governance team responsible for that. So let's mark this down. Now we need to actually bring in those stakeholders. If let's say that you have implemented in the past other agents that are already, or let's say even specific existing workflows that you think that you can leverage inside your agent, list out those agents. Next slide. So again, as I mentioned, it's like hopefully like they are self-explanatory, but let's look into knowledge and data as an example of like, okay, how can I actually leverage that? So again, think through the listing out every knowledge source. We spoke about like the HR use case. I have tons of documents that outline that, and they are stored in SharePoint. And it's really, really important and crucial to not only consider the kind of data sources, but also the quality. So that makes you think through that process as well. So we're probably all familiar with like garbage in, garbage out, but this is really magnified significantly when you build an agent. And I personally came across different use cases where we started building an agent with a customer for their HR. And we found out that even for a human to go through answering specific questions, you have completing documents, answers, multiple versions of documents inside their SharePoint. And we had to actually look for like people literally from the HR to be able, like as a human, not as an agent, to be able to answer like certain questions that when we fed through the agent, we found out that like, okay, is this really the right answer or not? What's the accuracy level? So again, when we talk about like a building block in here, it's not necessarily only through the lens of like, oh, let me list out a bunch of data sources. It's thinking through what does that mean from quality perspective. Do I or a certain business unit need to go back and clean or improve the quality of the data that we have in here? And if, let's say, again, going back into like, is this really structured data and unstructured data? Does everyone have permission to that? Are there any like specific governance and security implications? So you can start in one block, but you have to relate to the rest of the blocks. Whether this is evals is another example of that when we talk about like knowledge and data, and then I would like to actually evaluate that, the quality of that. Next slide, Zavi. So again, like transitioning into another building block, and evals is another example. So relating this back into when I talk about my data sources and knowledge sources, how can I actually evaluate the accuracy, completeness, and consistency of that? What does that mean as a category? And maybe I need to actually make sure that I list this out as an important success criteria or launch criteria. I know someone mentioned that like performance, and again, if you don't bring like clarity around this on day one, around like what's the expected performance, you might end up being blocked or having a significant delay when it comes to launches. So let's say that you're building this for your finance department, and then they have like expectation, or like let's say unwritten expectation that the latency should be below 10 seconds 100% of the time. Is this realistic based on your knowledge sources, especially if, let's say, that you're using external data sources, or if you're hitting a third party where there is a bottleneck? Or maybe, yes, it is realistic, and yes, it needs to be documented. And now you have to actually write down not only evals in the sense of like accuracy and completeness, it could be evals in the sense of evaluating performance. So all of that, and again, just meant to provide you with that framework to start through your thinking process before you even jump into the building. And we're going to be walking you and showing your, Vasavi is going to be showing you like a couple of examples into how you can actually put this into practice to help you in that kind of high level design and thinking process without necessarily going into the extensive documentation, design documents mode, and introduce that kind of overhead, which is, again, in many cases is important and critical, but it's not necessarily that is required on day one to just let you very quickly figure out your direction, requirements, dependencies, and have kind of constructive discussion and feedback with the rest of your stakeholders. With that, I'll let Vasavi just walk us through a few examples.
Awesome. No, thank you. Thank you so much, Hazem, for introducing the Copilot Studio Canvas, and hoping that we could use this as a framework moving forward to start building your custom agents, right? So let's actually dive into some real world examples of how we can take some like scenarios and transform that into this Copilot Studio Canvas. So let's meet Sarah. Sarah, who's an employee in Northwind, Germany, who is a very new resource and still going through onboarding, and she's not familiar with like where the different resources exist, but is trying to figure out like how to understand the leave entitlements and going through like tons of SharePoint folders, maybe like 10 plus documents, and Sarah also received a new laptop and having track the status. So this is like Sarah's pain point coming into Northwind as a new employee and spending more than 30 minutes just to understand leave entitlements or to track a ticket status. But with Copilot Studio, we know we can we can create an agent that can give Sarah instant answers to her questions. Like we can build an Ask Me Anything agent. But instead of trying to jump right into Copilot Studio and start, trying to build that agent from Copilot Studio, let's see how we can break this down into the Copilot Studio building blocks, which was proposed just earlier, and how we can map this pain point, break it down into the building blocks, identify the different components, and then see how we can, transform that into building the agent. So in this scenario, first step of our building blocks is thinking about the use case in terms of jobs to be done. Sarah called out her pain point, and in this case, Sarah is trying to go to work with HR and her stakeholders, all the relevant stakeholders in the organization. She's going in with a proposal that, hey, I have this pain point for even getting answers to simple questions or managing the ticket status. How about we come together and build an agent? So starting off with her simple problem statement as a description, along with the jobs to be done, like in terms of the jobs to be done here specifically are, how do I get access to the leave entitlements or policy related questions? And the second part is, how do I track status for incidents, right? And all of these with also calling out the specific cumbersome processes or challenges involved on a day-to-day basis and how they can work together to reduce that frustration and also save time, not just for Sarah, but all the employees in the organization. And Ask Me Anything or Ask HR is a very, very common scenario that all of us run into, and most organizations already have an Ask HR scenario. Let's break down into the components here. So thinking about triggers, given that HR has agreed this to be an agent within Northwind, HR is thinking of like, hey, we just need a conversational agent for our employees to interact with, and only through natural language queries, right? You don't really need, like when a new email is received or a phone call received, you don't need any additional triggers. Here, it is just going to be a conversational chat-enabled agent, and that's why we are saying like no triggers are needed for this scenario. But moving on, in terms of channels, again, this is going to be a B2E, business to employee and enterprise scenario. So deploying it in Microsoft 365 Copilot would be a great option for the employees so they can use these tools right from the place where they work, like whether it is Teams, Outlook, which will also help ensure maximum adoption. So I'm able to take that scenario and break it down into components, right? Knowledge and data sources. We already spoke about SharePoint as the documents being available on SharePoint. So figure out like where all those documents exist, whether they're the frequently asked questions or policy documents. Make sure you curate all of them so they're available for your agent. And similarly, if you want more enhanced, advanced like semantic indexing on top of your documents, advanced indexing, and also of a higher quality, then you can think about bringing them through Azure AI Search for your agent. And we can also add ServiceNow specifically for incident updates or any questions on, the knowledge articles within ServiceNow. Moving on to tools and connectors. Think about tools as Hazem explained, right? Like when you want to have a transactional conversation, you are expecting an action or an outcome, then it's great to use tools. In our scenario, we heard that Sarah is from Germany, and similarly, Northwind is a global entity, so there might be multiple people from multiple different regions trying to use the agent for understanding the leave entitlements. So rather, one option is obviously going in and creating a topic and asking a question explicitly, like, hey, what location are you based out of? However, that information is already available through the Microsoft Entra ID connector. So it's going to be super simple to go fetch that user location behind the scenes. Like, so just adding a tool to use the Microsoft Entra ID connector and go fetch that user location. In topics, I just mentioned about how we could have added a topic, but it's not absolutely necessary to go in and create a new topic just to fetch user location. But if you think like in the V2 version, maybe you're trying to gather a lot more information from the end user, then you can obviously add more specific topics if needed. But in our case, what we can do is just update the system topic, like the conversation start that we have, to go in and fetch that, to call that tool and fetch that user location and store it in a variable so it can be used for further actions. Otherwise, I'm not trying to do any other data collection, or there's no need for any other multi-turn conversations or complex logic, and I'm skipping creating any other topics in this scenario. Instructions. Instructions play a very, very critical role in agents, in Copilot Studio agents, right? Anything that you call out through instructions, that is exactly what helps your agent orchestrate through the knowledge, tools, or multiple agents that you provide to your agent. So in my scenario, I know I'm calling a tool to get the user location, but how do I really use that user location when triggering, when making calls to get relevant knowledge sources or relevant documents from the knowledge, right? Again, here, one option, the traditional approach, on day one, maybe you will not just provide that instructions, provide those specific details in the instruction. You might approach like, hey, let me go into a topic, let me fetch the user location, and then as I have the user location, let me make a dedicated call to the knowledge. And if you have a SharePoint resource for every region, then all you can do is just append that location to your existing knowledge URL, which will redirect and get you the information from that specific location. And you can also simplify it by just providing that in your instructions without having to create a topic or a deterministic flow, by letting know through the instructions where anytime you find that user country, append that to all of your knowledge search queries that are HR related. And we'll see this in action in just a moment in the demo that I'm going to show as well. Agents. Another requirement or jobs to be done that Sarah called out was like being able to understand the status of the tickets. In this scenario, given Sarah is already working with HR informs her about an existing IT support agent. And anytime you think about agents, if you are creating, if there is a requirement like to bring in like domain specific expertise, rather than trying to make one agent do multiple things, it's much easier to break them down into multiple agents and leverage them as needed. So in this case, I already have an IT support agent that can help me retrieve ticket specific information. And maybe in the future, I can update that to also create a new ticket, right? So I'm not trying and creating a new agent, but repurposing an existing agent here. Governance and security. When we talk about tools knowledge, governance and security does play a very important role, at least from the end user perspective, right? So user authentication for the agent is necessary. So it is in order to honor the access permissions to the knowledge that we are talking about. And similarly, we need the end user location. So we need end user credentials exactly for that reason. And if we are talking about tools here, when I'm using ServiceNow, rather than using the end user credentials, I'm using the maker provided credentials to be able to go fetch the ticket details, in at least in my scenario. And lastly, evals is very, very new. I know it has been around for a while, but only we have started seeing in the product pretty recently. So think about evals to help you evaluate your agent. Traditionally, like you used to have test cases, but you can bring them directly into your agent. And rather than having to start off with like, at least think about high-level categories for your eval sets, right? One of the category could be the jobs to be done. In this scenario, leave entitlements and ticket status, that's our jobs to be done, and I can think about creating some eval specifically for the jobs to be done. But apart from that, then you have to think about evals in terms of accuracy, evals in terms of like clarifying questions. Are they being asked? Is the responses relevant to the context that we are using? Are the citations appropriate? Is the agent avoiding hallucinations? So think about high-level categories in the beginning, like of what your agent has to do, and then you can break it down into further evals, and we'll see that also in a quick demo. Let me play this. There's no audio, and I'll talk over this. I also want to just give me 1 second, make sure we're good on time. Okay. Okay, so here is the Ask Me Anything agent. So what we did here was we took the scenario, we broke it down into the building blocks of the Copilot Studio agent, and we did not use different terms. We used the terms which are exactly the building blocks of Copilot Studio. So it was super easy for us to take those building blocks and transform them into going into Copilot Studio and actually building that agent right here. So as you can see, I have my instructions. I have all the different knowledge that is essential for my Ask Me Anything agent. I've added the tools to get the ServiceNow ticket details and also the IT support agent. And when I ask the question, what is the leave policy? You can clearly see that it changed the question, appended that the location is in Germany, and was able to fetch the results for me based on location in Germany. And this is on behalf of like Sarah that we are doing this a little test, right? And then the second jobs to be done from Sarah's perspective was to be able to understand the ticket status. So similarly, when a question is asked about a ticket status, it knows that it needs to go into the child agent, IT support agent, which can help it fetch the ServiceNow ticket details and provide that in the response. So all of this was taking in a simple way of how we took that scenario, broke it down into the Copilot Studio building blocks and transformed that into an agent. And of course, for the agent to function, we had to review it, revise it a couple of times, make sure right descriptions are provided in the topics, tools, and in the instructions as well. Just move on. Okay. Another aspect, I spoke about like evals of how you can think about creating, first thinking about high-level categories of evals, including the jobs to be done or accuracy or to prevent hallucinations. And what I'm going to do here is in that same agent, you will now see a new tab called evaluations. At a high level, as you go into this evals tab, and before I start, like we do have a eval sessions, a dedicated session focused only on evals and how you can evaluate your agents. That's coming on Jan 28th, and we will paste the link again. But if you're new to evals and would love to learn more about it, you can plan to register to that session and come back and learn, and also share with more folks in your organization. I'm seeing a note about voice breaking. Am I coming through fine or? Okay, cool. I think that's good from us. Thank you. Okay, going back to this, right? So going to the evaluation tab, you will see how you can create a new test set for your agent. And for that new test set, you have multiple options. You can either, if you already have some existing test cases, you can just upload them. Or you can generate 10 questions, which can be 25 and 50 using AI. Or if you have had a previous history with the chat with the agent, you can use that. Or you can also manually add your own test cases. We will try going ahead with generating 10 questions, and how you see how based on the description, instructions, and everything that I gave, it automatically generated 10 questions for me. And if I don't like something, of course, I can highlight and delete that, or if I think it is irrelevant. And you can also select and edit kind of like the question to be more specific. And you also have an option to go back and generate more questions than what is in there, or add like a eval test case manually. I noticed that in my questions, it did not naturally pick up what is the leave policy. And even in terms of like how to test that, I have a few options that you can, explore further. I just asked about what is the leave policy, everything else looks good, and I click on evaluate. At this point, what it does is it takes these questions, evaluates them against the agent, and compares the responses either to that general quality that you mentioned, or if you provide an expected response, it compares against that and gives you back a result whether your test cases has passed or failed. This may take a couple of minutes in real time. I have recorded this, but in my case, I see that 90% was passed, but one of them failed. For whatever reason, it could not go figure out how to fetch all the IT support tickets in my scenario. Maybe I did not configure some knowledge or action correctly, but you can obviously give feedback here and go back and review our questions. And it also helps you that, okay, if my agent has failed, now is the time for me to go back and fix this in my agent, right? So test it out more thoroughly. Another use case here, we only spoke about like a conversational agent, but think about in a real world scenario, support issues don't really always come through a phone call or through like a chat, right? It can come through email as well, or even on Teams. So what we can do is we can build an autonomous agent that can actually process your emails, retrieve those ticket details, and send comprehensive responses instantly to your end user. I'll try to go through this one a little bit quickly. Again, here in getting my description in terms of jobs to be done, my core requirements are as an IT support team, we want to build an agent that processes emails and understands the relevant user ticket details and can send a comprehensive response. In terms of triggers, yes, we do need trigger support here because we are building an autonomous agent, and I'm going to only support incoming support email, but you could also add like a Teams message as one of the triggers. And there are several triggers available if you go into the product and look to add triggers to your existing Copilot Studio agent. And channels, this is an autonomous agent, so we are not going to publish it to any existing channels. But you can have multiple ways of running this, right? You could have it trigger through a topic or through by getting an email into your inbox as well. Knowledge, I have like a public website and some SharePoint. And tools and connectors. This is important here because when you look at the jobs to be done, clearly I'm saying that I want my agent to be able to retrieve some knowledge or ticket information based on what the end user asks me for, and also be able to provide a consolidated response based on the questions that came in. So I'm creating two connectors. One is ServiceNow to fetch that ticket information, and the second one is using an Outlook connector to send a response back to the email. I'm not creating any custom topics in this scenario, and I'm going to provide very, very clear instructions for my agent saying that, hey, you have to isolate every question in the email that comes through. If it says anything about looking for some data, go through and look in the knowledge, or if there is a ticket or an ID mentioned, then use the ServiceNow tool to get that specific details. And once you have all the information, combine it and respond back to the end user. I'm not using any agents here. And from a governance and security, we need the end user authenticated in order to make sure it varies scenario to scenario. In this case, the end user is just sending the email and it's running autonomously. So we probably don't need to have a user authentication at all, right? And finally, the eval set, again, thinking about what kind of categories of eval sets you need to build, and then start breaking that down into having specific use cases or test cases within each eval. Let's go through this quick demo one more time. For this autonomous support agent, I have provided clear instructions of what my agent should be doing. Again, taking everything from like the canvas, identifying the building blocks, and transforming that into an agent in Copilot Studio. So as you can see, the first step is I have a trigger, which is like when a new email arrives. And here is a different email inbox. This is the email inbox of the support team. Right now, you see that there is no email. And I have another user, Emily, if you see on the top right here. And Emily has a support issue, and she's looking for steps to reset her password and also wanting to get an update on the ticket status. And that email goes into this user account, like the test user that I have. It may take a minute or two, and you see that the support email has come through into this user's inbox. Now we can switch back to Copilot Studio and test if that new email trigger worked. I did see when I created this demo, right? So you see how the trigger was identified, and instantly my agent is off to work using the orchestrator behind the scenes. It's able to understand the instructions and take the relevant actions, fetch the knowledge, fetch the ServiceNow ticket details, and also send a compose a response back to the end user with the details about how to reset for password or how to get that incident status. So with that, right, like it's easy to say a lot of this, but at least that simple design process of first thinking about your use case, breaking it down into the jobs to be done, applying it to the framework, bringing your relevant stakeholders, group of people, and having a collaborative discussion in terms of what your agent should look like, and then going into Copilot Studio and translating that building blocks into the actual development on Copilot Studio will help serve better versus jumping right into Copilot Studio. I know we are pretty tight on time, so with that, I will just pass it on to Hazem for a quick summary of like the takeaways. And I know Ashley will start getting her survey slide up, and we'll take any questions. Over to you, Hazem.
Thanks, Vazari. And unfortunately, I lost access to that chat. I know there has been like lots of great questions, so I just probably need to restart my Windows, but it's a risk I'm not going to take during the session.
To share, we can walk through the questions.
Yeah, and I'll just even if we don't manage to go through the questions, we will make sure to even provide an answer offline. But I think just with all the kind of details and content that we walked you through, we want to just quickly recap in terms of like some of the best practices approaches that we recommend to just like summarize everything that we gone through, including the practical examples that Vasavi walked us through. So practically start with an outcome in mind. This is ideally will help you to just like focus more on the end goal, what you're trying to achieve with the agent, and ideally try to get crystal clear about like value that you're trying to drive out of building that agent, because that again, this will guide your entire building process. Again, if you're into just like jumping into building straight away, look into templates, leverage natural language. That will give you a head start, will help you to iterate faster. And with the introduction of the Canvas, we think it's a very useful tool to just break down your use cases into essential building blocks. The transition from the Canvas to the actual implementation is meant to and designed to be a kind of low-cost transition. It's not going to be like lots of mapping back and forth. But think also through the iterative approach, as Vazari mentioned, it's just like you can start with one simple version. As you go through the discussion, brainstorming process, stakeholders discussion, you will definitely iterate through even the Canvas. And it's a kind of a cheap way and easy and low cost to iterate through it rather than like doing this real time through the design process. And then last but not least, take this and just bring your agent to life by building whatever you have outlined through the different iteration from the Canvas and start building inside Copilot Studio.